And welcome back to Insemination for part 2 interview with David Berry, the donor-conceived biological son of Dr. Wortman, the Rochester OBGYN who committed fertility fraud, who recently deceased in a plane crash. We're not wasting time. I know you're itching to hear the rest of the story, so let's get right to it. Welcome back to part 2 with David Berry. How are you doing, and are you ready for part 2?
I'm ready like spaghetti, and I'm doing well. Thank you. How about yourself?
I am doing very well. I've been having PTSD moments from our part 1.
Why? What could have possibly have drawn that sort of reaction?
If you do, just a reminder to our audience, not only do we record this as a podcast, but we also film it, so you can watch the whole video on YouTube, and you will absolutely be able to pinpoint the moments where David traumatized me from this story and just go, no, oh, Laura's changed there.
So we just can't undo that damage. We continue.
Yeah, no, but I feel like it's a collective trauma now as donor-conceived people. We're all gonna huddle together and we're gonna share it and then go have snacks. Like that's what we just gotta do.
And you and I have literally done that. We have had snacks, which makes it easier.
We have. We need more snacks.
More snacks.
I think whatever our next DC trip is going to be, more snacks and happy
hour. More snacks. Yeah, agreed. Well, we've already resolved an important matter before we actually get into part 2. So I feel like we've made some nice progress here.
Absolutely. And for anybody, just to let you know, all of the legal stuff, all of the legislation, we are going to be talking about that at the end of the episode. So make sure that you stay tuned for the whole thing so you learn how to help prevent fertility fraud from the future, because, hey, that's the biggest goal we've got.
Please do, and I'm going to make a really unsavory joke here, but if this is just me talking about my crazy story, then this is only masturbation, meaning I'm the only one feeling anything. I don't want you guys to just walk away from this and say, wow, that's crazy. Move on with your day. You can, but I really encourage you to stay to the end, because I'm going to try to make it as easy as possible for you to be involved, to help us in some way.
And we've proven already that people calling in and emailing literally makes a difference with certainly fertility fraud. Like, we've already seen it happen. So please stay to the end. But until we get there, let's all collectively get traumatized and hear this part 2 of David Berry's story. Just a reminder, David Berry is the biological donor-conceived child of Dr. Wortman. Dr. Wortman was a fertility doctor, OBGYN in Rochester, New York, specifically Brighton. Is that correct?
That's right. That's where his office was. Yeah. It still is.
Still is. And Dr. Wortman switched out the chosen donor DNA in so far at least 17 patients we have found so far.
Yeah, 17, 18. I'm always rounding off one way or the other in the wrong direction, probably.
When you get past 10, you forget a sibling or two. And Dr. Wortman just died in a plane crash. So there's a lot of different emotions going around, and we were already planning on doing this episode before we got that news. But with that news, we decided that this is now or never. Let's talk about it. He's in the news, and his whole story needs to be understood. Everything that happened needs to be absorbed, because what this man did in his life was quite horrific. And we now have the power to change it. So let's do that. And let's hear the rest of the story. So we left off was you got on the phone with Dr. Wortman, and and before that you had talked to one of his raised daughters that he had raised, biologically his, and she kind of gave you like a hint of going like, here's how you get him on the phone, this is what you're going to talk to him about. And you also sort of like jokingly brought up like, hey, we all were wondering, like, are you the biological father, because all of us siblings kind of look alike and we all look like you.
Yeah.
What's up with that?
He knew it wasn't a joke when I asked, pretty directly. But yeah, I was trying to be light and cute about it at first. It didn't feel that way afterward. But.
So how did that conversation kind of like wrap up? How do you leave a conversation like that?
Yeah, it's so one of the things, and I'm glad that we had a part 2, because as I was mentioning to you before, I did take notes during this call, which I didn't have them in front of me when we last spoke, and I do now. And frankly, I'll just tell you and everybody listening some of those things. One of the things that was interesting to me, I know I mentioned this last time, was the acceptance that that could come from the Jewish community to me in particular. And one of the things he said was, and some of this is verbatim, some of this is more just kind of my notes, but he said this literally is like, you need to hear this from me. That yes, if you want to become fully Jewish, there is a conversion process, right? Explore it, see if you want to, type of thing. And it's possibly important if you want to raise your son this way, which is the whole premise of what I told him the phone call was for. But his first wife, he had said, was raised Roman Catholic, and when they married, but the Jews, his community of Jewish people, would accept her wife and people like me as quote unquote Jews by choice. That that he had found that the Jewish people would always be very accepting in that regard. He also had made a comment that if I make that commitment that I do want to go through a full conversion and decide to live a Jewish life, then I have every right to claim my identity, which I don't know was or is an intention of mine, but I think in some ways it allowed me to see the potential for not feeling like an imposter, which is, if I really did want, to not feel that way, that there was a path for me. And in some ways, and again, this is the weird theme of this, which is I know too much going into the phone call. If I didn't know any of those things in this phone call, this was nice. Of course, that's it's not all that I took from it.
Yeah, there was a subtlety, there was a subtext to this conversation that was a little bit more at the forefront.
A little, just a tiny bit. The last thing that he said to me was Yash Akah, which in Hebrew means go from strength to strength. And those were the last words of our conversation. And as it turned out, the last words that I ever spoke to him, which probably would have been the case, regardless of when he had passed or how he had passed. And honestly, even as I'm saying that now and reading it off the page, which I forgot that phrase, I don't know what he meant by it, and maybe it wasn't a loaded statement. If anything, I thought it was a nice sign off. And hanging up that call was a little weird. As I'd mentioned, I was at the gym when I received the call, and so there was no going back to working out after that. It just felt a little anticlimactic to say, all right, well, let me go finish some sets.
Is it weird? Because I mean, I know you didn't know like you do now, but that was the one and only time you ever spoke to your biological father. And he is your biological father in a very hideous circumstance. But for you, what does that emotionally feel like, knowing that that was the one and only time you ever got to speak to your biological father?
It honestly doesn't feel that much different than how I have felt and how I continue to feel about him in the first place. And I also recognize that I have the benefit of saying that because I did have a phone conversation with him. I know the rest of my half siblings, with one exception, have never, had a conversation with him. And so I have the benefit of knowing that I can check that box and say, it's not of substance to me. But I'm grateful in a weird way for the things he shared with me.
Yeah.
I'm grateful that it doesn't have to be an open question for me, but in terms of how I feel about him in my life and the role that he played, it's always going to be this uncomfortable dichotomy, which is to say, I shouldn't be here. The way that I got here is not okay, and yet I am. Yeah. In fact, Laura, you were with us in DC, and one of the roundtables we had with some members of the House Judiciary Committee, we'd come up with this visual metaphor of saying we're the last ones to arrive on the ship, and we want to be the last ones dropped off. No one else should come to shore on the boat. It's the last voyage, so to speak.
I like that metaphor a lot, and I feel I definitely think if you're a product of fertility fraud, I think that this is the forefront for you, but I think that a lot of donor conceived people are right there with you, of just going how we were made the just unethical ways on how all of us were made. It's like, I don't want this to happen to another donor conceived kid. And let me paraphrase. Let me just, I'm not trying to end donor conception. That is not my goal. I want it safe and ethical for everybody involved. But the way in which I was conceived and others were conceived, certainly in our age group, it's like, it can't, I'm sorry, we can't have that happen to another kid. We can't have that to happen to another parent.
No. I was in DC another time, and this is just an aside. We can kind of bring it back to center in a second, but she was not donor conceived, but her children were. And she gave birth to a set of twins. One of them had health issues from the start, and he unfortunately passed away, I want to say at 5 or 6 months old. Of just not having been able to, to overcome what this was. As it turns out, receiving a sperm donation, she learned, not through the cryobank, but through others who had received sperm from the same donor. Number one, that it was a prolific donor, and that the bank knew not only that, but that there were genetic abnormalities in his DNA that he was passing on to his offspring. And if they had known what the ailment was, they would have been able to treat her son pretty quickly. Instead, they were treating him for any number of things that were not related to the rare, disorder or illness that was afflicting him.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, he died. And, like we think of some of these things in hypotheticals, right? Like I'm grateful to say I have my health. There are certainly, some things that come from Dr. Wortman that are, have afflicted some of my half siblings, and I have bad knees, so we'll call it that. But thankfully, not some of the other more taxing matters, but it hasn't involved, life or death types of things. But it has meant that for other people. Yeah. And this woman's son would still be with her if the bad actor, and there's bad actors at every level, right? It's not the donor, right? Like if he knows that he has this genetic, abnormality, or maybe he didn't, I don't know. But there was no screening process in place to identify that he would have that abnormality. And even after it was discovered, California Cryobank said, this is a popular donor. We're just going to keep shipping it out, even internationally, potentially, which is like you're knowingly putting families in harm's way.
Yeah.
You have a better chance of getting, the right burrito at Chipotle with the right ingredients than you do of having your child come home with the pieces and parts that you expected.
And this is something I don't think people understand I don't think they understand genetic testing, and they don't understand medical history. There's a lot of misunderstandings on how both of those work. And for anybody, just letting you know, I will be getting a genetic counselor to be doing 2 different episodes with us. So stay tuned. Awesome. It will be happening. We're going to be going full into the science of it. So make sure that you are subscribed to my podcast to make sure you don't miss those episodes, because I'm very excited that I'm getting her to come on. But people don't understand what medical history is, because when I'm like, we deserve our medical history, people are like, well, nobody has their medical history. And it's like, do you know both of your biological parents? Well, yes. So you would know if your mom had breast cancer. You would know if your dad had a heart attack. Well, yes, of course I would. I'm like, that's medical history. It's not knowing which genetic markers you have. That's genetic testing. And I'm like, yes, now that's a piece of knowing your full giant medical history, but knowing that oral medical history that is passed down from family member to family member, saying, yes, we have a long line of like men getting heart disease, or yes, we bipolar disorder runs in our family, or like, yes, our family struggles with depression, or you know what, a lot of people have had breast cancer. That kind of stuff is medical history. Right. And when it comes to genetic testing, I don't know a single clinic or cryobank who does an absolute full panel of genetic testing.
No.
And even if they did, you still can't genetically test for everything.
Also true.
You can't genetically test for bipolar disorder. You can't do that. We don't know. Maybe years in the future we can, but we cannot right now. So even if we could do that giant panel, it still wouldn't tell you everything. And how genetic testing works is typically when you go into the doctor or or hospital and they're trying to figure out like, oh shit, something's wrong. They don't do this like giant genetic testing panel on you. They're like, well, let's test for this. Okay, but like, let's test for this.
That's a very good point.
And there are how many genetic illnesses, diseases in the world? It's untold. Well, it's not untold. There is a number. I just don't know what it is, but it's thousands upon thousands upon thousands. It's hundreds of thousands.
Yeah. The other thing to play on to exactly what you're saying is, in the absence of that ever happening, and the other dilemma, right? Most people are discovering that they're donor conceived, whether through fertility fraud or some other method. A lot of them are discovering later in life. Not all, but a lot of them are.
Yeah.
And by then, maybe some sort of ailment has already afflicted you, and maybe you navigated it well or you didn't. But what's happening, at least in my case, all of our 17 or whatever the number is, half siblings are sort of using each other as a sounding board of medical history, because we are starting to show some things that mirror one another as the group gets bigger. So, but again, like, there are things in all of our lives in this collective group where earlier intervention could have made a difference for several of us if we knew it was in the pipeline, and we didn't.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and it doesn't just affect the donor conceived people, it affects their children as well. You just had a son. This is going to affect your son as well. This affects Morgan's kids as well. This affects everybody.
Right.
But let us get back to to your story. No, nothing to apologize. This is always a good PSA to remind everybody like how this actually works. But so I know that right now, I would like to sort of actually do a little bit of a roundabout way. Is I know that you all are in process, and we're getting to the point of proving that he is your biological father. But I do want to highlight one other thing that happened with Dr. Wortman involving your sister Morgan. And I only want to sort of touch on the story. I don't want to dive into the details of it, because that is for her and her alone to share. But I do think what happened to her needs to be understood, because he's not the only doctor who has done this. This does seem to be a pattern of doctors who committed fertility fraud. So I would love for you to sort of touch upon that, if you would.
Yeah. And to your point, and I don't want to be like playing cards with anybody or poker, trying to show my face, or trying to not show my poker face, but you're 100% right. This is Morgan's story to tell in those nuances. Morgan, like a lot of women, at least in my understanding, arrive at the decision to choose a gynecologist based on who their mother saw. If there's a good relationship with that physician, that's a pretty logical path to go down.
That was my first OB as well. I went to the same OB as my mom. Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, I don't say that from my own experience, but as I have heard. And as it happens, in this specific case, Dr. Wortman was not just an OB; he was a gynecologist, and Morgan's mother also saw Dr. Wortman for this. So the referral to Morgan was to Dr. Wortman to be her gynecologist, and she saw him for several years prior to the discovery of any half sibling, me. Or any of the however many there are, and she saw him for several years. So I won't go down the path of the details beyond that, other than to say, unfortunately, your imagination is probably on the right path.
I will add one detail that Morgan shared with me, and she okayed that I share this piece of it. He was very aware. He was very aware. Like, this was not an accident. This was not an absent mind. He absolutely knew what he was doing. And very much of a trigger warning for what I'm about to share. One of the red flags that Morgan saw, and she definitely was like, something's off, was she would schedule a pelvic exam, a physical exam with the nurse practitioner, and he would actively reschedule it so that he would be doing the physical exam.
Yeah.
He knew what he was doing, and it's something that he is not the only fertility doctor who has done this, who has committed fertility fraud. We also have Dr. Kim McMurray's, and we have Dr. Klein, who have also been the gynecologist for their own biological daughters without them knowing. This is very terrifying to me, that this seems to be... I always sort of lose my train of thought, and I always lose my words on this one, because it terrifies me to think how much this is happening, how many other doctors who are doing this out there, and their kids don't know. They're seeing their OB, and they have no idea that's their biological father.
It's one thing for me to go through what I've gone through and to say that it's been challenging and difficult, and it has. But I also look at myself in the scheme of things compared to a lot of my half siblings, and specifically Morgan, and say, holy shit, I've got an easy ride compared to this, because I can't wrap my head around that.
Yeah.
At some point in that process, let's assume the best case scenario, maybe he was ignorant at some point to knowing exactly who she was. But there was certainly a point, in fact, multiple points, where he became increasingly aware of the context of who it was that he was dealing with, and did exactly what you said, actively chose to intervene so that he would be the one seeing her.
Yeah. And it's, I don't know how you as a file that. I don't know, like, how do you go to, what therapist do you go to? Who specializes in this? Like, how do you pack away this trauma? How do you even start to unravel this one? And I cannot even imagine, like, what her mom must be feeling knowing this. I can't believe, oh God. And it's just the insidiousness of this is just, it's never ending. So please understand that this is also going around in the background, and not in the background, but this is also happening as well. So as they are trying to figure out, is Dr. Wortman my biological father, please understand what emotionally Morgan is going through as well. You hung up the phone with Dr. Wortman, and then what is your next step? What is collectively as the sibling pod, what do you guys decide to do next?
Yeah. So at this point, and just to kind of like dial it back, I know that Ariel has already shipped in her DNA test.
Ariel is for anyone who forgot, Ariel is Dr. Wortman's biological daughter, who he raised, who is now estranged from him. She's essentially no contact with him for, at this point, 10 years.
I think, yeah, that or a little bit longer.
Yeah. Okay. So she's already shipped in the test, and this is a real paternity test. This isn't like 23andMe Ancestry. This is like a government approved paternity test.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. This was, in fact, I will again give credit to DNA Angels for this, because
we love DNA Angels.
They were already thinking, far ahead in terms of like potential implications, like if there was ever some sort of a legal, standing for us to tap into. This was the only way to confirm it. And frankly, this is also preempting when the New York Times wanted to write about it. They wanted something more substantive and that would hold up in court, basically, if they were ever challenged. It was the DNA Diagnostics Center that we did our report through. And yeah, so we were, in that point, waiting for the results. I shared with, I want to say, most of my half siblings, I presume, that I had the conversation, but sort of said, like, look, no smoking gun, nothing that we collectively may not have known or inferred. And it was still just sort of this waiting game, but it was not a long waiting game. If memory serves me correct, that phone conversation with Dr. Wortman, I want to say it was maybe 2 more weeks that I had to wait for those results to arrive. And I remember specifically saying to Ariel, well, like, this is not my information alone. Like, I'm the one who's going to receive the results through email. That's the way it was set up. But I agreed, with her in advance, that when I know that the results are in my inbox, I'm going to get on a Zoom just like you and I are now, and I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to open them at the exact same time. And so that happens. That email arrives. In fact, I have it here. I don't remember. Well, actually, this is a forwarded version. This is May 25th of 2021, actually. And I still didn't understand, like, there's locus, there's allele sizes. Like, I didn't understand a lot of that. But I scrolled to the bottom with like a little summary. On the day that this came in, we ended up on Zoom, like I said, and it says, based on, I'll read it to you right here. Based on testing results obtained from analyses of the DNA loci listed, the probability of half-siblingship is 99.99%. And we both sat there, briefly with just sort of that, like, I don't want to even call it stunned silence, because stunned would not be the right word anymore. Like we had already considered something that was so outlandish. If anything, my feeling was a mixture of relief and to say I don't belong in an asylum for thinking that this was even a possibility.
It was validating, but in an extremely awful way, kind of.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the worst possible way, it was validating. Yeah. And I honestly don't recall what I felt rather. I in a weird way, I might have felt some sort of peace, which I wish Morgan could have felt. I wish some of my other half siblings could have felt. Selfishly for me, in my context, there was some degree of liberation, like I said, because I'm not taking credit for all of the discoveries in our group, but
you didn't feel like, holy shit, I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy, that my gut instinct, and I can understand the validation even with an awful thing, but going, holy fuck, I knew it. I fucking knew it.
Yeah.
Obviously with Morgan and other siblings, this unfortunately confirmed a whole wave of trauma that now they have to deal with. But I fully understand why for you it would be like, I fucking knew it.
And also too, it was a mild dose of redemption from, and I'm not going to say I had a hard path compared to some of my other half siblings, but like some of the reluctance that my parents had in me pursuing some of this and finding, answers and stuff like that. I felt vindicated in some ways that like I was onto something, and and this needed to be discovered. There's a quote from the book 1984, which has been quoted so much, well, all the time, but certainly more in recent years too, but in this context for a completely different reason. But it is, if you want to hide the truth, you must also hide it from yourself. And
ooh, that is really good. And that really, for donor conceived people, that's like, oh shit, that hits.
I don't know when I came across it. I was, I've read 1984 several times, but I remembering that, and just that was sort of a rallying cry for me for a period of time, which is like, I can't conceal this. Like, you put some, a truth like this that's just water under a rug and it's just going to develop mold. Like it's not going to go away. And I have developed a real cold relationship with the truth. I'm in favor of it. I care about the implications of it, but not to the extent that I will avoid the truth at the expense of someone's feelings.
It is why I encourage donor conceived people to be like, I understand why you just want to put this in the drawer. I get it. Or you literally want to bury this 100 miles away from you. Like, I get it. It's not going to go away. It is. And what you might end up discovering might be extraordinarily hard. It might be horrific. But it also might be liberating at the same time. And I can't speak for everybody. And it's like, I'm me. And, I don't want to at all downplay any kind of trauma that anybody has gone through with finding out the truth. But this shit needs to get uncovered. It has to get uncovered. We have to figure out what the hell has been going on for decades.
Yeah.
As you said, we got to clean out the mold. We got to and the only way is we got to peel back the carpets. The only way we get the mold out.
Yeah. And it's not on me to tell people how to deal with their own things, because Lord knows my path was not a straight one in terms of navigating this. But I know for myself that if I were sitting here today and I had not pursued like a rabid animal, like the answers to these questions, they would be gnawing at me somewhere. And one of the things I think I acknowledged this, the first time we spoke, that I had selfish motivations at a lot of times throughout this process. And I'm becoming more and more okay acknowledging that. But when my son was taking up more real estate in Jesse's belly when she was pregnant, it just became more and more real to me that, like, well, he's actually going to be here. He's not just an idea. And I didn't want to give him questions. I wanted to give him answers. And in fact, I hope that he grows up thinking very little about this.
Yeah.
That when he learns, what this is all about, it'll be a conversation starter, I suppose, for him if he wants to. But he's not going to have to go answering questions that I did. And that was another motivation for me too. But all of which is to say, it doesn't matter what your motivations are. And if you're worried about offending or hurting somebody or whatever, I understand. Like, I had to navigate that with my own parents.
Yeah.
At some point, you also need to be able to stand up on your own 2 feet if this is what you want, and confront those difficult conversations. And I'll use myself as an example, which is to say, Mom, Dad, this is part of your story, and I understand that, but this is my life. You have the answers. You always had the answers, and I don't. Yeah. And I need to pursue this. And I hope that the loved ones in your life treat you with the kindness and gentleness that's deserving, even if they don't understand why. And you deserve it.
There is a very weird phenomenon, and it's not just with donor conceived people. I do think this is for like all NPEs, adoptees. But I can only speak about it from a donor conceived person's perspective. I know that this pattern seems to be affecting other members of the baby business and all NPEs as well, is that for whatever reason, the kid who never chose any of this, never chose to be donor conceived, anything, is responsible for everyone else's emotions around the donor conception. And our emotions about it come last. We are supposed to be grateful, not worry about it, not think about it, and it's supposed to just be okay. And we are supposed to actively worry about everybody else's feelings at the expense of ours. Yeah. And the moment many donor-conceived people start to go, I don't know if I'm okay with this, the literal anger, the cruelty that they face from their family, from society, is absolutely asinine to me. And it's like, this is half of their DNA. This is half of their body. This is going to affect them for the rest of their life. Yeah, they're allowed to have complicated emotions about this. They're allowed to go, I don't know about this. This kind of seems a little fucking weird to me. Why don't I know who my siblings are? That seems strange.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but that seems weird. Or to be upset that you weren't allowed to know who your siblings were.
Right.
And that your donor's anonymity literally matters more than your own health and safety. That you're allowed to be pissed at that. And you're allowed to be upset that your parents hid this from you. This is all, it is normal. And for whatever reason, society has just decided, no, you're just going to swallow all of that and take care of everybody else. Fuck your feelings. And what we have seen is, as more and more donor-conceived people have been owning what they feel and do what you do and become like, I'm going to become a rabid research engine, look what you can uncover and look what you're able to fix. By us coming forward and actively pursuing what the hell this is, we have gotten regulations put in. We have set up support groups. We have been actively changing how the infertility industry works to be a much safer haven for donor-conceived people, donors, and recipient parents. So yeah, let us fucking speak our truth, assholes. We're fixing it!
And I would also say, too, even the people who were conceived through an ethical, healthy donor-conceived, path or whatever, even the exposure of these conversations and stuff is creating resources by way of therapists who now have the ability to get training from something that they didn't know
Yeah.
Previously was an issue or that existed. And so even people with quote unquote normal, discoveries without any, wild cards like ours are able to get help, to get, someone who understands them, who can help them navigate the complicated emotions. Like, you don't have to have a dramatic, story. You could have a totally healthy relationship with your family and everything too. But your parents are also not equipped to deal with, the experience that you're having either. I would argue, despite some resistance with my parents, they were mostly supportive, but they still don't have the tools or the experiences that I'm having. And having people who understand my experience, who are also qualified to help me navigate it, has been paramount to me being okay. Yeah.
We have discovered how pretty emotionally impactful it can be when you're separated from your biological family, even from birth. And so, yes, all donor-conceived people, it's like your story matters. Your story matters. Your health matters. It all does. But back to your story. So
back to our regularly scheduled program.
Yes. So we have confirmation. We know Dr. Wortman is the biological father. Where is Maury right now? Jesus. And so we know this. What do you guys decide to do with this information? You got dropped a truth bomb. You're holding this. What do you do?
For me, the first thing I did, almost 2 weeks to the day, was hold my son for the first time. That was awesome, and it just is what it is. I will never be able to pull Dr. Wortman out of that experience, because he was, in my mind, it was just sort of like this cartoon, good angel, bad angel, like on your shoulder, my dad and him on either side holding my son. That was hard for me. Even to still think about that in some ways was hard for me. But I'm going to fast forward a little bit to say I was only loosely interested in, and I will say, this is my perspective. I understand that some people want to pursue, damages, in the form of lawsuits and stuff like that. It has not been my personal motivation or interest. But what I will say started to get me like paying attention to that was, I did think that justice was required. Let me clarify. I didn't necessarily think that I needed, money or compensation from it, partly because I didn't see myself as the victim, even though I recognize I have continued to experience the fallout, but I see my mother as the victim in this case. Again, this is my perspective. I don't disagree with others who feel differently. But I was floored. I'd just not really been paying attention. But I was floored to discover that, like, oh, well, this guy's career is going to be on ice once this is out, right? Because holy crap,
Anyone who's following me is just drinking right now, going, "Oh, sweet summer child."
Isn't it like the Kermit meme where he's sipping, his tea or whatever?
It's to me, it's very much, with the Spider-Verse. This is a canon event where everybody thinks like, "Oh, well, this guy's going down." Then it's like the boom, noise. It's
and
like
it doesn't happen.
And then it's a canon event.
I don't, again, maybe you're listening to your first episode of Laura's podcast or many others, so I will repeat if you've already heard. At the time, I want to say 9 states had fertility fraud legislation on the books. New York State was not one of them.
And just to clarify, fertility fraud legislation makes the act of fertility fraud, meaning, switching out the chosen donor DNA for your own or any other that you feel like this is not accidental, this is absolutely intended. So the fertility fraud legislation essentially makes that illegal. And that egregious act, when David found this out, only 9 states considered had fertility fraud legislation passed. Today, marking, what is it? It's June 22nd right now?
Yeah, in the year of our Lord, 2023.
Yes. The year of our universe. It is, we have 11 states. A whopping 11 states now.
Big shit.
Good for us. Pat on the back, high fives all around. Look what we did. So, and that's always the first conversation I have with everybody. And I still get comments going like, this can't be legal. This can't be. I'm like, I know it sounds comically evil. I'm aware that you're thinking like, Laura, that you're making this up there. And I get people like arguing laws in my comment section. Yes, but what about this? What about this? I'm like, I get it. I understand. It's not how fertility.
You're preaching to the choir here.
Like, we get it. We agree with you. But literally, we were in DC in January trying to get this shit passed because it's not illegal. Anyway, okay. So you're thinking, I've got this guy. We're gonna bring him down. His career is over. Fuck yes. We've got it. We're gonna make this lemonade. All right.
Let's right a wrong, you know.
Let's
and
get
I'm thinking
justice.
of it from like a positive standpoint, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, I'm here. I'm content. You know, like let's do something good. You know, let's help make sure that, you know, this doctor is not practicing, because
you put on your little cape and you're like, and off we go.
Oh yeah, but I'm a big deal, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Yeah. So it's fertility fraud, not illegal in New York State.
No.
Here's what I like to call it on the opposite side. Something like this that is not outlawed in a state, in my estimation, is actively endorsed, because you've got at that point, well, the 9 other states, right? New York being the progressive beacon that it loves to see itself as.
And Eve has actively tried to get fertility fraud passed in New York State. It's not that like no one has. Eve has tried.
Yep, and right to know has tried in different angles. They've pursued different legislation, but yeah, it just hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. There was momentum.
Fuck New York. As two New Yorkers, as two people who were, I know technically you're not a New Yorker like anymore, but like you were born and raised in New York, and I am born and raised in New York and still live in New York. What the fuck, New York? Like, this is embarrassing. You want to know what state beat us to this? Fucking Florida.
And the fact that I live in Florida, and I know how backwards Florida is, and it's only gotten worse in that regard. Now, I like to think I live in Miami, where there's a little bit more of urbanization, but whatever. If the shoe fits, wear it. But yeah, Florida is one of those states that has fertility fraud legislation, and had it. Like, I want to say they were, state 5 to 7, somewhere in that range.
New York, this is embarrassing. Texas beat us to fertility fraud.
I can shoot anyone I want in Florida with the chances of there being minimal repercussions, probably. And this is not okay. They made sure that fertility fraud was illegal, but I can shoot anyone.
Fuck, guys. Like, this is like New York. Get off your fucking ass. Like, we don't get to wave like our oh my God, we care about humans flag. Like, we don't get to hold that flag anymore. Like,
maybe
this
that's
is
why,
sad.
because there's not a flag attached to this issue, so New York has decided it's less important. I'm venting. Well, I'll bring us back to center.
I will say, I do think one of the issues we do face is the infertility industry. A lot of it is in New York. We might have a lot of clinics in New York City. We have a lot of clinics and cryobanks within New York State. We now learn fertility fraud is totally groovy in the state of New York.
It's fun. I mean, they're just like, have at it, kids. Go for it.
Party, everyone. So what do you guys decide to do?
At that point, I wouldn't say there was a collective anything. I think some members of our group wanted, to pursue litigation, and obviously saw this as a big obstacle to doing that. Morgan, being an outlier, had a completely different set of circumstances that she could pursue based on, the context that we've laid out. I don't know, honestly, that there was a collective agreement. I think, all right, so the legal part notwithstanding, I think part of us still said, all right, if it's not illegal, then maybe his license will be taken away, right? Like, that seems easier if there's not a law. There's some sort of, ethical boundary that has clearly been crossed. What I will say is, up until his passing a couple of weeks ago, 2 years from the confirmation of him being our biological father and national press, international press, he was a physician in good standing in New York State until the day he died. And so that didn't happen either. For me at that point, I didn't have, and I know what we're about to get into is, like advocacy work. That was really not on my radar. I don't, and again, like, you never imagine yourself in certain situations, and I'm not the person who will put on that cape and say, I'm going to be the hero. But I was put into a unique situation when confirming this news, and I'll kind of dial back. When the New York Times had first reached out to me, about this blog that I'd been writing, they were the ones in some interesting ways that kind of set some of this discovery in motion by introducing me to people that, I didn't know. I was oblivious to this world that I'm now a part of. And so the New York Times, obviously we shared the information with them, and I don't have like the exact timeline in my head, but a few months later, they ran a feature story on this incident. And you had alluded to this before, but I want to say at the time, Dr. Wortman was either the third or the fourth doctor in Rochester, New York alone who had been a perpetrator of fertility fraud. Doctors who had knowingly used their own sperm.
I didn't know that. Oh my God.
Laura, I'm going to blow it up even further because several of them were friends with each other. They knew each other. So we'll put that aside for a second. When the New York Times
hold on. No. I'm going to speak for the audience and go, we need a second. We need a moment to digest that. Three to four doctors committed fertility fraud in Rochester, and they were buddies. Oh, did they get matching tattoos?
Oh, it's a good question. They should have looked into that.
I would want to brand them. Jesus Christ!
If you're going to be part of a club, I'm actually going to log in here real quickly while we're online, I think, to my New York Times account.
This always happens where, like, I have a moment in this podcast and I get this sudden urge of, like, I need to clean everything around me. Everything needs to get fucking cleaned now. Like, why is it so dirty? Oh, my God.
It shouldn't be this way. Yeah.
Oh, they were all yeah, it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't that they all would be, smoking cigars, talking about swapping sperm.
You got to think it might have come up. So this is what I wanted to. So from the New York Times article, let me see, because one of the doctors did go on record and say something. Here we go. So Dr. Frederick Dischinger had died the year before, so I guess this would mean 2021. And Dr. Robert Titchell, who is retired and was living in Rochester, were found in June of 2021 to have secretly used their own sperm with their patients as well. It was also gathered through genetic evidence from DNA angels, as it happens. But Dr. Titchell, 89 years old at the time, I guess he's 90 or 91. I don't even know if he's still alive. But he said, I was a donor at one time. Sometimes back in those days, this is a direct quote, sometimes back in those days, before the days of fertility clinics, if you couldn't get a hold of a donor and you were working with a patient who was looking to get pregnant, it wasn't exactly ethical, but it wasn't unknown to happen. He added, I assume other doctors did it, but no one ever talked about it.
Wasn't exactly ethical.
My friend, that is exactly unethical. There is not a clearer definition of the defiance of ethics.
Delusion is fun.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So as it relates to me specifically, so this story hits the New York Times, and for better or worse, has a massive photograph of my face as part of the article, which kind of quickly puts me in a position that I really was not the day before. After that, Morgan and I were interviewed together for Good Morning America and Nightline, which is apparently going to air someday. I don't know when, but they have a lot of footage from having interviewed us, which put me in a position to start meeting some people who saw me as either an advocate or somebody who was advocate-ish. So again, this is not something that I was thinking, but I was given an opportunity after meeting some folks to join the board for Right to Know, which is an organization that hopefully some of your listeners are aware of. But Cara is a dear friend. I love what the organization does, and they're not exclusively in the area of fertility fraud. I will clarify. They work with adoptees, donor conceived people who have less nefarious circumstances and stuff, but they serve a number of roles, largely in therapy and resources for support. Anyways, I was given an opportunity to join that group and continue to meet folks over the course of the next several months. And yeah, it was afforded me an opportunity in October of 2022, were the first time I was able to go to DC and meet with some members of Congress to talk about this legislation a little bit more broadly.
Mm-hmm.
And then again in January, which is when I met you with Eve, Jacoba, Kurt, the rest of the gang that was up there, where we actually had HR 451 at that point with a name to assign to it. And the way I looked at it was like this: I didn't choose to go do, if we'll call it advocacy work, but it was sort of like, okay, in this really obscure, small, subset of folks in society, I started to develop like a degree of celebrity, which feels like such a weird thing to say, but you know what I mean? Like in this really, really tiny
and
group
it's
of
a
people.
very weird reason to have any kind of celebrity status.
Yeah, I don't even think there's a letter in the alphabet that corresponds with how low on the celebrity status I am. It's certainly not in the Phoenician alphabet that we use, but it gave me a forum, it gave me a platform.
Yeah.
And the way that I see it, it was just like, if all I really have to do is show up and tell a story that I am already telling,
yes,
but I just tell it in front of different people who have, some potential stake in being able to do something about it, can I do that? And yeah, like for me personally, in the context that I have, that is an easy yes.
Yes.
And so if and again, I understand the advocacy label. It's not one that I particularly feel, again, because I was already doing this on my blog when nobody gave a shit about me. So for me to go do it in front of Congress is no skin off my back. But that is where I guess my role in all of this has come forth, because, and I know I've said this several times, I look at my circumstance and my situation specifically, only for me, as a better scenario than a lot of others. There are people who are not as far along in their journey as I am, who have maybe not done some of the work that I have, or even if they have, are just not comfortable, being in front of a room full of people. Never mind, I'm a member of Congress. Like I recognize each of those things are unique, but again, if all I have to do is get in front of these folks, make a few phone calls, tell my story, ask some other people to be involved, I can show up for that. Why? Because just because I'm doing fine doesn't mean it was an easy process for me to be okay. And I don't feel the need for legal recourse, but I also know that some people absolutely do, and it is absolutely their right to have it. Our parents are absolutely at the very top of that list. Our mothers, who sat there in stirrups in the cold room with the speculum, like all these things that I think we want to gloss over, right? No, we can't, because it's those details that make it crystal clear what happened here, what is absolutely unequivocally not okay and cannot happen again.
Yes.
And so, and sorry, I'm getting fired up. Just,
no,
kind of
I like passion.
Stump, but
we actually got a comment recently from somebody. I believe that they are adopted, and they were like, I like seeing people being okay with being angry about this. And they're like, I like people not being polite and kind and not sugarcoating it. We are all for passion and stating how you feel, and not sugarcoating it, and not being, just nice and making it pretty.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
We talked about this before in part 1, which now really does feel like we're in part 3, but like a doctor looked at several of our mothers in the nude, vagina exposed, and in a state of arousal, or gets themselves to a state of arousal, masturbates behind a door, steps away from this woman, who, mind you, in her mindset is not just naked and exposed, but is vulnerable and worried and hopeful all at the same time, and thankful that this physician is here to help solve this challenge of getting them to start their family. And the doctor takes that context and goes out and jerks off into a cup, probably looking at porn, or maybe thinking about our mothers, maybe a mixture of both, and then comes in with a fresh sample, still in a state of arousal, and inserts it into our mothers, does not disclose it to them, and he can walk away.
Yeah.
And he did. And it continues to happen. So yeah, it's not okay. I, at a minimum, want physicians, or not just physicians, but anybody who misrepresents the nature of what it is that they're donating, any of them. And frankly, the fertility banks that have a role in facilitating the delivery of these things, all of them should be held accountable for this, because it's not okay.
It's not okay.
And if we're not doing something about it, then we're endorsing it. And I'll pause for a second.
Speaking of the endorsing, when the news hit the floor of Dr. Wortman, tell me, David, tell me, did Rochester all come together and go, fuck this guy, fuck Dr. Wortman, this is horrible, how can we as a city be okay with this, holy shit, oh my god, fuck you, fuck all this, and I'm imagining a glitter cannon that just spells loss of license, at least, like, if you're not going to lose your license, you're certainly not going to get any business from us. Tell me, David, did that, what we would all expect everybody to come together, and this is what we could all do, did that happen, David? I'm just curious. Tell me how much the town came together.
Something about your setup tells me that you might know the answer to that question. Yeah, no, nope, no. It's fascinating to me. People, I'm generalizing, a lot of people have an issue with two truths coexisting at the same time. I know that there is a laundry list of women who have had life-saving surgeries from Dr. Wortman, great experiences and interventions through multiple periods, and that is all true. At the same time, when there's unequivocal proof that this same individual has also done something else, we don't like it when things that don't match our worldviews kind of crash into each other. But guess what? They do all the time. And just because you know good things about someone, and whether it's a loved one who's close to you, or if it's a physician that you go to, wrong requires accountability. And in the case of a physician, there is a method of accountability, or at least it should be in theory, that at a minimum, medical licensing boards exist for this reason. Where the law does not intervene, the medical licensure boards do. You should have no issue saying this doctor is capable. He's great at what he does, and he also multiple times violated the ethics and so many other words that fit into that, the confidence and trust of his patients. That is not a physician who should be practicing medicine. And so I say all that to acknowledge the more direct answer to your question is no. With great regret, I read the comments on all of the articles that were out there,
God.
Whether it was national news or local news. And Eve Wiley got to me far too late in the process to say, avoid those things at all costs. And I didn't. And it's not as if I didn't expect what I saw. But the fact that my name was in the article, that my picture was in the article, it was my story, obviously was, not obviously, it was more hurtful than I wish it was. I allowed some of it to eat at me. And the things that you hear are exactly that. Some women coming on and defending, well, he's a great doctor, he took, great care of me. I'm happy for you. He took great care, of my mom at other points in their working relationship too. By the way,
before the violation. Yeah.
Right. So there's that, right. And immediately that's dismissive of something that has happened and my experience and those of my half siblings. Then there's the larger contingent of people who are saying, well, who gives a shit? You're here. Why are you complaining?
Yep.
Awesome. That's a sophisticated thought. And then the other is, in addition to that, your dad's a doctor. Your dad's a doctor.
Oh God. Why everyone?
I hadn't thought of that. You're right. Now I'm better. Thank you.
Everyone that I get in the comment section whenever fertility fraud comes up, everyone's just like, "What? Why are these people whining? Their dad's a doctor. They got doctor genes." I'm like, you imbecile.
Yeah.
Imbecile.
Yeah.
I don't know how to break this to you. But yeah, this is and just to make sure that everyone like understands that this isn't something that David is the only one who's gone through. Jacoba, what she faced, she actually, if you go to Jacoba's Instagram, she has like one of her like pinned stories, or like pinned highlights, is the trolls that have come after her saying like, you need to be more respectful to your father. That man is your father. Like she has, Eve Wiley had articles written about her going like, well, like, you know, I guess Eve is really struggling with this right now, but hopefully, you know, she can really find peace and stop, you know, hurting this man who is a good Christian man who has been there for his community. Like this happens.
Yes.
All
Yeah.
in like
I've
clockwork.
I've seen the same thing said in our situation, 100%. And now, don't get me wrong. I also need, and this is not defending anybody, but we're talking about the internet, which is not a place where people show up with their best selves or are capable of nuance, right? So I know that I need to.
What's that? Nuance? Is that French? What the fuck is that?
It's New Balance, but in France, it's a sneaker brand. But yeah, exactly. It's like, all right, so I know I need to keep that in context, that people are here for the sound bites and blah, 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 right? But it's just like, but at the same time, there are people who are hearing this information and actively choosing to say, what I have to say about this is the thing that they need to hear right now, or that they haven't considered. Yeah, I regret that, that I allowed myself to be swept up into that. But again, it doesn't matter what those people thought or said, because it didn't change the situation. And it still, despite his death, has not changed the situation. New York State does not have fertility fraud legislation on its books. Shit, even the city of Rochester, that has 3 or 4 doctors just in the city. I mean, you would think that like, oh, maybe we could do something about it and, pass a local, which I don't know.
Rochester,
not the case,
what is it the garbage plates? Like what's going on?
It's probably that. Yeah, I don't know what sort of poison the Kodak smoke that we've been ingesting.
For anyone who doesn't know, garbage plate is a Rochester delicacy. It is the ultimate hangover drunk food in the world. And yeah.
It's undefeated against hangovers. So if you're in Rochester and you overserve yourself, you might want to find yourself a garbage plate. But in defense of Rochester, despite its physicians, I will say Joe Morelli, who's the U.S. representative in District 25, who represents Rochester and some surrounding areas at the federal level. When we went in January, he took my meeting. Not only did he take my meeting, but I mean that in a literal sense. A lot of times what will happen is you'll reach out to a congressional aide or something like that, and that's who you'll end up having a meeting with, which is great. Don't get me wrong. Like, to have a forum and someone who's willing to hear you and to consider you is really important. Joe Morelli was one of the few members of Congress who actually came to the meeting himself. And not only that, had clearly done his homework and research on the matter prior to meeting with me. So Joe Morelli, if you're among the people who hear this or whatever, I'm incredibly grateful to you, because you are not an indication of how Rochester collectively seems to have viewed this matter. And he has signed on to HR 451. So I'm very grateful to him.
Yes.
Yeah. And all of that other stuff out there being what it is exactly that. It's noise. And actually, even as I'm saying this to you now, I can realize that has been a consistent theme throughout my very, ignorant first stages of even trying to find answers, is like all of the things around me trying to get to the truth or the right result or outcome. There's always going to be noise around that. There's always going to be things, to distract or deter you or whatever. And this is one of the few times I can say in my life with total confidence that I know I'm doing the right thing.
Yes. And
I don't give a shit about what gets in the way of that. And I don't mean that to sound, full of bombast or anything like that, but like, I know how much this matters. I'm grateful that it's not affecting me on a day-to-day basis. And in fact, that's, maybe what gives me a little bit of a superpower, is that I can talk confidently about this thing, knowing that it needs to change and not being worried about ruffling feathers in the same way. Because I am in, in a better place for myself. But yeah, there's no question in my mind that like I'm not going to stop my involvement until the work is done. And I'm really grateful because it's not something that I'm sitting here saying as if like I'm the one, doing the lifting. I am one, one little foot soldier in a growing group of them of really incredible people who see in a lot of ways the crystal clear things that I do with regard to the importance of this legislation and these efforts. And I don't want, similar how I said I want us to be the last, people on this ship. I also want us to be the last ones who don't have a legal backing to provide justice for ourselves or our mothers. Like, I can't wait for the day, and it will happen, when we are on Capitol Hill celebrating, a whole bunch of us, about the passage of federal legislation that makes this the crime that it unequivocally is and should have been for a lot longer.
Well, then let's help us get there. Help David and I have the celebration that we so desperately want, which is the passing of H.R. 451, which is the federal fertility fraud legislation. Just a reminder, fertility fraud, as we said, currently the fertility fraud legislation has only been passed in 11 states. 11. That's fucking it. That's insane. And then when you think about like state borders and everything, it gets funky. That's why we need federal legislation. So, with that, you need to help us, and you can help us because we recently got the fertility fraud legislation last year passed in Ohio, and made a bunch of videos about that. And my fucking followers were just the most badass motherfuckers. The Ohio got got hundreds of emails and phone calls, and it got the fertility fraud legislation passed actively.
I don't mean to interrupt you on your own podcast. Unequivocally, Laura High, you and your followers are the reason that there is fertility fraud legislation in Ohio. End of sentence. I say that not for your ego, because I know you don't even have one about it, but to use this as an example.
Compliments bounce off. They don't. That's just the compliments on the floor. It's gonna live and die there.
That's all right. Well, don't worry. I'll throw more at you later. But what I will say is, for anybody like listening and saying, man, like government and the legislators and who am I reaching out to, right? Like, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But like, if you're of the mind that you can't do something, that government is too slow to move, I would say in a lot of cases that's true. But the legislators on either side of your political spectrum, where I don't care which side you're on, Republicans and Democrats, have really shown up for this, because they have both acknowledged this is different in the sense that, like, and they're talking about tax code, like they don't see the people, like they see the people, they understand, like this is real life-changing.
This is bipartisan.
For some of these people.
Fertility fraud has been that magic bullet of bipartisan power.
You want to bring the country together?
Fucking donor it's donor conception, guys. We are the answer.
You can be the change that America needs.
Just inseminate us into your hearts.
Okay.
That's why it's insemination, because it's bringing us together. But yes, it has been magically bipartisan. So we can get this passed, and we've already seen what can happen when you email or you call your legislature. And what we need is for more and more legislatures to sign on to it.
That's right.
Because we need to get this. Because right now we're waiting for it to get a date on the calendar. Where is it right now?
That's correct. We're essentially waiting for the opportunity to get this in front of the House Judiciary Committee. Speaking of Ohio, Jim Jordan chairs that committee. So the ability for Ohio constituents in particular to reach and flood Jim Jordan's office with requests to pay attention to this is of extra critical nature. In general, yes.
And you don't just have to be an Ohio constituent. You don't to contact Jim Jordan. I will have all the contact information in the caption for this episode in terms of who to contact specifically. But yes, right now, if everybody can just call Jim Jordan's office and say, give fertility fraud legislation, HR, H as in house, R as in Rosemary, 451. 51. It needs to go. We need it. We need that to get on the calendar.
Mm-hmm.
Call them.
I will also say, assuming that is not the expedited path that we're hoping for, I'm optimistic, but I'm realistic at the same time. You can also reach out to your local legislator as well. And here's something that I will offer as well, which is, I know that can feel complicated to people to say, okay, well, I don't even know how to find their email. And then there's also the legislative director for some of these folks. I have this information. I have like the list of, by
educate us.
Yes. So what I will say is I can't list, all 500 some odd of them over here, but you're more than welcome to email me. Can I read my email address here, I guess?
I can. I'll put David Barry's email address in the captions if you want that.
Yeah.
Your contact, how the best way to contact you.
Because what I'm happy to do is give you the email addresses for your legislator, along with like their legislative aide or lead, and also draft the email.
I will say, here's the only thing. We're going to give you David's contact under one condition. He's married. Okay? He's married, because when I've done videos with David, I get a lot of people commenting, oh my God, he's gorgeous. Oh my God, I want him. And I'm just letting you guys know, he is happily married. No thirsty emails. This is, okay, I understand he is the donor-conceived heartthrob. I get it. But let's keep it respectful. Let's keep it business, okay? All right?
Again, in this very small subset of celebrity that doesn't, it's too far of an outlier. I
was sending you screenshots. I'm like, you have some fans.
It's been a real long time since I've felt seen. So it was nice to know.
So keep it professional, guys.
We'll keep it professional, but seriously, I will help you track down the legislator and the legislative aide, who to email with this information, what to email, so that your participation is as easy as possible. Because I know, a stranger on a podcast asking you to do something is a reach, but if you're willing to do that much, I will make sure that I help you go the rest of the way. The more legislative co-sponsors that we can get on this, it just becomes sort of like a snowball effect. It just becomes harder and harder to ignore.
Yes.
As of right now, and I have the link open, there are 43 legislative co-sponsors on this bill, which is
phenomenal.
It's significant. Yes,
that's significant.
It is a significant number, but it's still not obviously at the place where it's gotten onto an agenda for a vote. So I won't belabor the point. My email address, I guess, will be in the meeting notes. The
caption,
notes.
Yes.
And I am more than happy to help put you on the track to support us. And if you do, thank you in advance.
And this is everybody. This is, in my opinion, and in many people's opinion, fertility fraud is sexual assault. It is a different form of it. It's using different tools, but this is. And right now, this form of sexual assault is completely legal with no repercussions. So let's get this off the table. Let's take this heinous act away, and make these people face justice. And as we are winding down, Dr. Wortman had a very surprising death. Passed away in a plane crash. With now understanding your full story, and everybody's going like, holy shit, how are you doing?
I appreciate you asking. And I would say the first couple of days were weird.
I would imagine so.
Yeah, because exactly that. Like, if you're sitting there listening and you're not sure like what the right reaction is, well, I'm part of your club, because I don't know either. I still don't know what the right reaction is. I will say that
we mentioned the word nuance and complicated earlier. Like this is, I can't imagine the complexity of emotions with this.
Yeah, and I don't want to overuse those, but they still happen to be the right ones.
Yeah.
I will say to an extent, I did feel that there was a loss. Um, Now, in terms of it being personal, meaning like I feel like I lost him. I didn't have a relationship that was taken from me. Like we had a phone call. Um, but I do feel like even if it was naive to assume that I think part of me believed at some point I was going to, when we talk about passing fertility fraud legislation, like I thought that was going to happen, and then I was going to see justice brought, you know, in some form, or an acknowledgement. I'll be honest, I I wanted an acknowledgement as my form of justice, to hear him
Yeah.
say, I did this, I had my reasons, I understand why it was not the right thing to do, and I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Something to that effect would have really, I can't say what it would have done, but
You
I feel like
were
that would have
you were
been
hoping
nice to hear.
you were hoping for closure. Some kind of closure.
I have an interesting, feeling about closure in general, and regardless if this had been my case or not, I think that closure is not something anyone else can give you. I think it seems that way because we want others to intervene and some way step up, and that should happen. So let me clarify. People should own up to their wrongs, and anybody who is waiting for someone to give them closure does deserve it.
Yeah.
But a lot of times we don't get it, and if we do get it, it's not in the form that we want. And even if it is, it's rarely enough to actually give us closure. I think, and I've learned that closure has to come from you, not you, Laura. It's
I
actually Laura's job, everybody. But
Oh no, oh my God. I have a lot of paperwork I gotta do. Okay. I mean, I will try and help everyone with their
I'm
closure as
sorry,
much as
I
I
didn't tell
can.
you. I didn't give you a warning. Yeah,
Oh my
Laura's
God.
responsible for everybody closure on anything. By the way,
Oh
not
my
just
God.
this. Yeah,
Okay. I have a lot to learn about like tax law. Jesus. Okay.
I know. Yeah.
Wow.
Don't
Okay.
worry. We'll have a part 4. We'll go through that as well.
I
but
mean, yeah, everyone, if you want a stand up comedian to help you with your closure, sure, it's going to be real weird. We're going to get real funky about it, but I'll do my best. Um,
it is your job, so thank you for stepping up.
yeah.
But no, jokes aside, like that closure was always going to have to come from me, and his death was a reminder of that like if I was going to ever find peace with this situation, then I had to be finding peace from me in the way that I was going to get that. And I think closure for me is still ongoing. I'll be
Yeah.
honest. I have resolved a lot of things in this, and I have not still made sense of how he fits into my life.
Yeah.
Because I can't undo it. I can't remove the DNA. Know that anyone's tried that. I imagine I would fall apart and I'd be dead. But I see his face in mine, and I know that his DNA is in my son, and I can't do anything about that. That for me is I think the biggest thing that I'm still navigating, and I hope I'm wrong, but to some extent I always will. I hope that the amount of time and energy that is invested into thinking about that minimizes over time, and it certainly has. But in terms of closure and forgiveness, I don't hold the grudge because it happened, and
Yeah.
I can't undo it. I can fight for justice. I can push to do the right thing, and to hopefully help others, and including some of my own half siblings. But even if that never happens, like I'm the one who has to decide
Yeah.
to embrace whatever it is that has happened, and move on, or move forward with it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's a great answer to it, but it's a work in progress. And I'm, in terms of where he fits now, having it, a couple weeks later. Yes, I mentioned that shock lasted for a couple days. Now I'm back to this place of saying I'm still in that in between space of knowing that I'm here because of him, and I don't want anyone else to arrive this way because it shouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And that's still how I felt in his life, and that's how I feel in death. And I suspect that it's going to be that way.
Yeah. I think that that was a nuanced, complicated, unanswerable, and I think that's the exact answer that was. I think that was an exceptionally understandable answer to that question.
I appreciate that, and I'm trying to really believe it too. You know, it's one thing for me to say it, and it's a process to continue to believe it.
Yeah, this is gonna take time. I mean, this is still very new, and this is gonna take time. And I hope that you and I hope all of your siblings and anybody who has gone through something similar, all products of fertility fraud, all victims of fertility fraud, be kind to yourself. This is a weird process. And I know that society and everyone around you is going to tell you how you should feel about this. And fuck the noise. How do you feel? And you take it day by day. And
1,000%.
This is complicated. And as you said, we do, as human beings, we do really struggle with the fact that two things can be true. We really struggle with that. And the more that we embrace that things are very complicated, the better we will be as a society. Are there things that are black and white? Are there things that are just yes and no? Absolutely there are. But we are complicated beings, and we have complicated emotions, and there are complicated truths.
Yeah.
And we need to acknowledge that.
I appreciate you saying all of that. And one thing I'll add as well is, you know, maybe you're listening like to this and this is new for you. I'm thankful to say that when I first discovered I was donor conceived, and I talked about like the shock that was, I happened to arrive there at a place when I was in a good place mentally. But I imagine a scenario where maybe I wasn't, and that was the scenario, you know, the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. It can be unquestionably one of the most isolating feelings, because you still have a family that is not going to ever understand exactly what you're feeling. Even if they're doing their best job to try, they're never going to understand. You have friends and maybe even, you know, siblings that you grew up with who are also not going to understand. There are groups out there, and I'm thankful that I found them in time. But you are not alone in that regard. You know, there's Right to Know, as I mentioned, and so many others of folks who've been on, you know, been on this podcast too. Like, there is a group of people out there who, and when we went to the Right to Know Untangling Our Roots Summit in March in Louisville, it was, you know, and I've been dealing with this for years. It's not like a new space for me, but the second I walked in, I felt at home, because I knew that there were other people who I didn't have to explain myself to, who immediately like disarmed me, because I felt like we shared, you know, something in that regard. And so I'm going a little off tangent, but I hope that you know that there are resources for you out there, so that you don't go through this alone, and you'll get there.
You will get there, and I do think that you hit on a perfect place to end this. Is being donor conceived is very inherently isolating. So to fight back, find the community. Find the donor conceived community. You don't have to be like David and I, okay? You don't have to be us. But find the community, and even if you're a silent member in the community, at least read the posts of other members of our community, because you will hear your story constantly echoed. You're going to hear your feelings validated. You're going to see you are not alone. And that will be healing. That alone put me in a place where I was able to publicly talk about this and really start advocating. So I am a massive, massive advocate for donor conceived people finding the community. It is so needed. And look what we've done in such a short amount of time of finding each other. Look what we've all done. We have been actively chipping and changing this industry within a matter of like a few years.
Yeah.
Since we've all found each other because of social media and DNA testing sites. So come play. We have snickety snacks. And
Laura and I are going to have more of them very soon. That's what we discussed. So
we will. And come hang out. Come hang out with David and I. We party, and we actually we had a treat yourself meal, and it was delightful.
It was a nice experience at the Untangling Our Roots Summit. It was a fantastic event.
We had a grilled brioche peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It was delightful.
Oh my gosh, you have a great memory. That was phenomenal.
It was really good.
Holy crap.
Yes.
I forgot how good that was.
That was
quite
hold
on, let's be honest. I think we also ate salads before we ate that.
We did, because we were like, we're going to have like healthy fiber and be like, look at all this nutrition food, and now brioche in my face.
It's called balance, that's what's necessary in life.
Absolutely. We were talking about trauma, so it was like, okay, let's nourish ourselves and let's nourish our soul. It's all good.
Eat your feelings a little bit. It's all part of the process.
It was, and it was delightful. Well, David, thank you again. And for everybody, again, David's email is going to be in the caption. Jim Jones' contact is going to be in the caption. I will have more links.
Jim Jordan.
Sorry, Jim Jordan. Oh, not Jim Jones.
For a second,
different bad
Jim Jones could take you in two different directions. There's Jim Jones, I think the Kool-Aid guy, and then there's Jim Jones, the rapper from South Florida, actually. So don't email them. They won't. Don't email
them. They're not gonna help out with this one. Jim Jordan, guys, this is why I'm a stand-up comedian, because I say dumb shit a lot. Yeah, that's why. And I'm not the one writing the legislation. I yell in my phone to get people to. But so Jim Jordan, his contact information, and we'll also have links to help you find your legislature. So we're going to help you. Let's get fertility fraud legislation passed federally. And David, thank you for your story, your vulnerability, your fucking advocacy, and personally, thank you for your friendship.
I appreciate you for all of those reasons and more. And yeah, I've said this like a number of times, but no one else is doing what you're doing this way, at this scale, and you're a hero. I mean it.
No, thank you. That was cute, but I appreciate that. I think we can give that title to like Eve Wiley. She get that crown.
Also a hero. By the way, remember, what is the lesson we learned here? Two things can be true at the same time.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I run around in a sperm suit. I don't. I can be your goober, but
not all heroes wear capes, but some do, and some of them are sperm.
And some of them are sperm suits. Yeah. I really we were trying really hard for me to run in front of Matt Gaetz's office in my sperm suit, but we couldn't orchestrate it, and I was like, fucking goddamn it.
There's always next time.
There's always next time, guys. But thank you again. Have a wonderful day. And for everybody listening, please like, subscribe, leave a review, because that kind of bullshit helps. And remember, the whole thing is filmed, so if you want to watch it visually, it's all there for you. But have a delightful day, and go have a snickety snack, because we're certainly going to.
That's my aim. I got a belly to fill.
Belly to fill, absolutely. Have a great day, everyone.
You too.